welcome back. We're talking about Hinduism today, and Hinduism is often one of the more challenging religions to understand for a Westerner. It is just very, very different. So we're gonna go through that today and hopefully get some clarity on it. Stephen Prothero, who I often reference, refers to Hinduism as the way of devotion, and what that comes down to devotion is practices. There are a lot of practices in Hinduism. You see here, our friend here is meditating, right? And so his meditation is his practice, right? He's probably using the meditative Om. We're going to talk about that in a minute. You can see the positions of his hands here. This is something that you'll see in movies or cartoons sometimes, even where they have their hands in those positions. So we'll talk about that. But that's what we mean when we talk about the way of devotion. There's just a lot of practices. One of the practices, and we used this as a background in a previous presentation. This is a fire sacrifice. So this is a Brahmin priest doing a fire sacrifice is another practice for Hinduism. So what is Hinduism? Well, one of the difficulties there is that there's a great book that I recommend called Our Religions, and each chapter is written by a practitioner of the religion who is also a scholar. The chapter on Hinduism says something to the effect of there are as many definitions of Hinduism as there are Hindus. It's a pretty big religion. It's followed by 13% of the world, which may not sound like a lot, but you have to think, Islam and Christianity are both taking up, 30 or so percent of the world. And so 13% is not small. It has a significant cultural element. Hinduism has a significant cultural element. If you are from a specific ethnic background, there's a higher likelihood that you're going to be Hindu. And that ethnic background is going to overlap with the religion to a somewhat significant extent. This is similar to Judaism, where ethnicity and religion sort of blend in ways that it doesn't necessarily blend in other religions. So that cultural ethnic overlap is going to be pretty significant for Hinduism. There are not a lot of common sources of authority. There's a lot of different perspectives on, just how to approach what even Hinduism is. So you talk to somebody who's in Southeast Asia who's a Hindu, you talk to somebody who's in New York City who's a Hindu, you're probably going to get two very different perspectives. Their practices may be wildly different. Their beliefs might be wildly different. It might be the same, right? Just the diversity of Hinduism is a significant challenge here. And so all of these different questions, shared beliefs and practices, shared practice definitions, shared geographical context, these all challenge sort of a single unifying definition of Hinduism. It's really hard to narrow down to that. So what do? Well, we can kind of do a historical survey and talk about kind of Hinduisms a little bit, sort of the general kind of unifying principles that exist. And that kind of gives us a sort of a boundary. Hinduism has neither a single founder nor a single sacred text, and there's no single event that even marks its birth. Hinduism kind of emerges out of diversity, which is one of the reasons why there is so much diversity still in it, if you could draw back to, a Moses or a Muhammad or a Jesus, it'd be a little bit easier to say, well, this is what it's about. But Hinduism seems historically to kind of emerge from a bunch of different viewpoints. Even the word Hindu, in the 19th century, the word Hinduism did not exist. The word Hindu was initially a term used by ancient Persians to describe people who lived in the Indus River, Indus River Valley. And so you can kind of see how, like, linguistically, if somebody has a language that doesn't tend to have words starting with a vowel, you're often going to say Hindus, not Indus. And so this is what happens. You have, instead of Indus, you have Hindus. And so these people are the Hindus people, right? Or the Hindu people, right? So that's kind of how that word emerges. Today, Hindu populations exceed 70% in both India and Nepal. If you go into that area of the world, then pretty much everybody you run into is likely going to be Hindu. All right, so what are the teachings of Hinduism? What does it teach? Hindu beliefs about divine reality. These can be monistic or dualistic or devotional. Monistic, if you remember from our discussion about worldview, this pertains to the word one. So monism believes that there's just one thing. Okay, so that's what we mean by monism. Dualism, as you might imagine, believes that there are two things. And usually this means that there is material reality and there is immaterial reality. And so we have material things, right? And we have immaterial things. So, body and soul and spirit, that sort of thing. So there are Hindus that are monistic, believing in one thing. There are Hindus that are dualistic. And then there are Hindus that are devotional, that don't necessarily concern themselves with either of those things. There's usually a specific name for the divine reality, especially in monism, monistic Hinduism. There's usually like a specific name. It's usually Brahma, which we'll talk about, in a bit. But Brahman is kind of the overarching idea of both reality and God. It's, again, kind of confusing, but we'll try to flesh this out a bit. Specifically, when we get to their literature section, they have a lot of analogies that might help us try to flesh some of the stuff out. And so, usually it's going to be this name attributed to ultimate reality. Sometimes it'll be specifically a god, and then sometimes it'll be various deities. There are some versions of Hinduism that are they take the devotional route to devote themselves to a specific deity. So they'll say they serve specifically Vishnu or specifically Hanuman or specifically Shiva. Just kind of depends. And so that's, again, diversity here, right? It's diversity. There's Mahadevi, the great goddess. So there's one divine reality. There's many gods, but as we're going to see, if there's only one thing, then those many gods are actually just the one thing, right? And monism's probably the most common version of Hinduism. And so this idea of many gods, like ultimately those many gods are not many gods. But, hang on with me here as we continue to explore this. Divine reality is a sound. The idea here with this Om is there's the initial moment of the universe is a sound, and that sound is kind of constantly happening in the universe. And so when you're doing this, this meditation, like this guy over here, you're going to be, chanting, and Timothy Tennant, one of our authors for a textbook, he doesn't like OM, he likes AUM, so that you're saying ow, right? Like kind of ow. And so that sound is the initial sound of the universe, and that's kind of like the fundamental like frequency of the universe. And so when you're making that sound in Hinduism, you are trying to participate in that which is real, that which is ultimately real, is the Om. That's the meditation. And so, that's kind of what that meditation idea is, but you can kind of see this guy's meditating, and he's meditating out in nature, right? So there's this Like you're trying to experience oneness ultimately with everything, right? Because if the actual reality is that everything is just one thing, then that means, your bucket here, the rock, um, the clouds, the mountains, the trees, all this stuff is all actually the same thing. And so what this guy's doing here is he's trying to kind of let go and experience the oneness of everything. Right? That's the idea here in Hinduism. So historical development here. This might help kind of get our heads wrapped around this. Prehistory, we're in the Indus Valley civilization. This is 2800 to 1700 BC. For our purposes, right in here, around 2000 BC, we're going to have Abraham, right? So Abe, right? And then just a little bit after this, we're probably going to have Moses. Okay, so just to give us some kind of ideas here. And then a little bit before this, actually, is when the pyramids, if that's helpful to you. I don't know why I spelled that instead of just drawing one a little faster. But the pyramids are built before that, right? So by the time that Abraham goes to Egypt, the pyramids are already ancient. A lot of times we think of the pyramids being built by the slaves, the Israelite slaves during Moses' time, but that's not true. They're over 1,000 years old by the time Moses sees them. So prehistory, we actually have some pretty significant civilization in this period that rivals even that of Egypt in the Indus River Valley. So that's kind of a big deal. But we've got disparate various tribal religions, architecture, like I was just saying, older than the pyramids, cities older than Athens or Rome. And so, as Westerners, we often forget about how significant this region of the world is. But their worldview is so radically different than ours that it's sometimes a little disorienting to try to adjust to their perspective. Aryan presence in India, and we have to say here, Aryan, this, while it is spelled the same as what Hitler will refer to as kind of the most important race or the best race or the highest race, this is not the same thing. Now, Hitler is actually getting it from here, as we'll see later. He actually gets the swastika from Hinduism, but for our purposes here, as far as this time period is concerned, it's a completely different thing. We're not talking about, even though Hitler is referencing this, he's wrong. so we don't want to connect those two until much later when we're talking about him. So this Aryan presence in India is there's this group of people that move into India that get called the Aryans, and so this is where we get sort of like proto-Hinduism. We get these tribal beliefs, these different tribal religions. They start to unify, like they start to come together. They start to kind of coalesce, right? And again, this is around the time of Moses, right? David would be over here in about 1000 BC. Okay, so just to give you some more, kind of historical perspective here, David's going to be about 1000 BC. So Aryan migration leads to the development of what we now know as Hinduism. When they move into India, that's when things start to coalesce, and that's when we really start to get Hinduism, which is interesting that Hinduism is kind of coalescing as a thing around the time that Moses is alive, which is kind of when Judaism is coalescing as a thing, right? So it's kind of an interesting connection. Vedic and Upanishadic periods. The Vedas and the Upanishads are literature for the Hindus. And again, we put David in here. That's where David's going to go. And then we've got Babylonian captivity in here. We've got the Assyrian captivity in here. And then right up here at the end, just after this, is when we would get Alexander the Great. Okay, Alexander the Great dies in 322. And so this is just to kind of frame Hindu history around Western civilization and biblical history to try to give you some points of contact here. Okay, so these Hindu works of literature, I mentioned this before, Sruti and Smriti, and I don't know Sanskrit, so if my pronunciation there is garbage, then my apologies, right? Just it's not one of the languages that I've gotten around to yet. Sruti is that which is heard. If you remember what we were talking about earlier with the Om, Tenet says that we want to kind of Om this, right? That which is heard, this is the most sacred kind of literature in Hinduism, because this is eternal with no earthly origin. The idea is that this is actually in that sound, right? Whatever is the Sruti, that which is heard, it's actually a part of that Om, right? It's a part of that kind of resonant frequency in the universe. So we have Samhitas, we have the Brahmanas, we have the Aranyakas, then we have the Upanishads. These are all Sruti. These are all higher level as far as their authority, right? Their how sacred they are. And then we have Smriti, which is that which is remembered. This is material passed down. So there's a difference here between what doesn't have an earthly origin and then what does, right? This is passed down. So this means this has a history, right? It started at a specific place and kind of just keeps getting passed down. Whereas this just exists. There's no passing down of the Om. The Om just is, right? So this stuff that's passed down, this is earthly in origin, and so it's a lower level. It's like commentary almost, right? It's great, it's helpful, but it's not at the highest level. So this is where we have sutras, Puranas, Mahabharata, which includes the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is one of the longest poems in human history. And then Ramayana, which is a great story. So these are important, very important, but they're just at a lower level because they're kind of embedded in human history, whereas the other literature, Brahmanas and Upanishads, Aranyakas, they're thought to be sort of like eternally existing and kind of embedded in that Om. So the Vedas and the Samhitas, there are 4 works in praise to early gods and goddesses in Proto-Hinduism. Again, kind of thinking about our time periods here. Hinduism is just starting to coalesce, moving into this. And so this is sort of early diversity. We have the Rig Veda, we have Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, Atharva Veda, and these are all just Vedas, right? That's where that word comes from, Vedas. And so each one of these, hymns or words of the priests collectively contain 1,000 metrical hymns, chants of the priests, formulas for sacrifice, and then Atharva Veda, which is much later, is esoteric and secret formulas. Esoteric meaning kind of like vague and mysterious and sort of hard to understand, right? And so that's what the Atharva Veda is. Okay, so those are the Vedas. They're helpful. The Brahmanas, prose commentary on the Vedas. You see this in virtually all religions. There's some sort of commentary on things. The Aranyakas, about the same time, various treaties. The Upanishads are the most important body of literature in Hinduism, and this is the foundation of Hindu philosophy. So if there's one thing to understand in Hinduism, to try to understand what Hinduism is, it's the Upanishads. Now notice, this is much later in date. This is much later than the kind of emergence and the coalescence of what Hinduism is. So by this time, you sort of have like kind of a definitive sort of core of Hinduism. There's still diversity, right? Still plenty of diversity, but you've got that core. The Mahabharata literally means the great epic of India. One thing that you'll pick up on here, Maha, this word in Sanskrit, again, I don't know Sanskrit, but Maha will show up in several things that we'll look at with Hinduism, and it just means great. Okay, so anytime you see Maha, it's great something. So Mahatma Gandhi is great souled one, right? So that's one example of that. So in the Mahabharata, we have two families, and they fight over the throne. The Bhagavad Gita is one of the longest poems in the world, like I mentioned. It's a portion of the Mahabharata. Includes a great deal of material on Krishna. Krishna shows up in the story a lot. Ramayana's epic tale of the god Rama. His wife Sita is taken captive by a demon and taken to Sri Lanka. Rama, who is an incarnation of Vishnu, we'll unpack some of this stuff in a minute. He rescues his wife with the help of Hanuman, the monkey god, and Hanuman's a big fan of Rama and Sita. We'll see that in a bit. There's a video that you can watch on this that'll really help you kind of understand what is the plot of the Ramayana. You can actually just Google this, and you can watch it for free on YouTube and various other places online. Sita Sings the Blues, and it's a really interesting story that kind of overlays the Ramayana with somebody with a modern woman's story in America, and so it does a pretty good job of kind of illustrating the story there. So now the 10 themes of the Upanishads. Remember, I said the Upanishads are the most important thing to understand for understanding Hinduism. Right now, you are probably super confused, and that is okay. Hinduism is confusing for Westerners who have no orientation to Eastern philosophy, Eastern thought, Eastern religions. These are what I think are the most helpful things in trying to kind of wrap our brains around what is Hinduism belief. Okay, so Brahman is most important thing in Hinduism. He is difficult to define. He's ultimate reality. He's the key quest in Hinduism. Now, there is a distinction here between Saguna and Nirguna Brahman. And Saguna, I may have this backwards. I'm trying to remember. Saguna is with attributes. And Nirguna is without attributes. Now, I could be wrong about that. I might have gotten that backwards. But the idea here is that you can posit things about Brahman, and that would be Saguna Brahman. You say Brahman is good, right? That would be an attribute. Nirguna Brahman is just sort of like understanding him without an attribute. It's more of a kind of an instinctual level. And again, this goes back to the Aum, right? Aum, right? Without attributes is going to be a higher level, right? It's going to be up there with that which is heard. That Nirguna Brahman is going to be higher. And this is similar in Christian theology. We have the same thing. We have negative theology and positive theology. We can say God is love. We can say God is not hate, right? That sort of thing. So Saguna and Nirguna, kind of the same thing there. There's also the Atman. This is the soul or the self. And remember, if I said Mahatma Gandhi is great souled one, Maha Atman means great souled. Right, so Mahatma Gandhi is a great souled one. Tattvan Asi, this is one of the phrases in Sanskrit that I know off the top of my head because of studying Hinduism that I'll probably repeat for the rest of this lecture, especially when we get to the metaphors. The metaphors are like, and if you want to understand Hinduism, then the metaphors, that's where it's at. Okay, but Tattvan Asi is thou art that. So if you can understand yourself, you can understand everything else in terms of yourself. This is what Tennant calls a cosmic homology. ultimately, if we go back to the guy meditating, right, he's trying to experience this oneness with everything. Tatvanasi is thou art that. So he is one with the air and the mountains and the rocks. And when he looks at the rock, he can say, or he could say to someone, Tatvanasi, right? You are the rock. You are the same thing, right? Samsara is literally flow, but really this is a cycle of life, death, and then rebirth, and then life again, and then death again, and then rebirth again, right? And so this is the thing that we are all trapped in Hinduism. Hinduism believes in reincarnation. Maya is the illusion, and it's a false way of viewing the world. This is where most Westerners struggle the most with Hinduism. Everything that you see is Maya. So when someone says Tatvanasi, well, I'm not, that rock. There's a difference between me and that rock. Well, no. Tatvanasi, you are that rock. Your thought that you aren't that rock is a part of the illusion, right? And so you need to shed the illusion. The illusion is what's trapping you in samsara. And when you shed the illusion, you can leave samsara. Okay. So everything that you see, if you've ever seen The Matrix, right, that's what this is. The Matrix is Maya, right? You are in an illusion, and to get to ultimate reality, you have to get out of the illusion, right? Karma, which the way that we tend to use this in the West is not correct. There's not good karma, bad karma. There's only bad karma. Karma is act or a deed. And this is like the weight on your soul. So your soul accumulates karma, and that's what keeps it in the cycle of samsara. So you have to rid yourself of that karmic debt to get out of reincarnation. And then moksha is the release from samsara. This is the goal. This is where we're all headed. This is what we want. This is the purpose and drive of Hinduism, is we've got that life and then death and then rebirth, right? And moksha is how we get out of this. Moksha is the liberation from samsara. It's the liberation from the cycle of reincarnation. It's the liberation from all of that stuff, okay? Monism, we've talked about this already. Monism, everything is Brahman. Yoga is one of the 6 schools of Hindu thought. So this is one of the things that you would do you do yoga to work towards releasing karma from your Atman, from your soul. Eventually this becomes a term to broadly describe the path towards moksha. I know there's a lot of debate in Christianity about whether or not we can do yoga. I'm not going to touch on that. I'm going to leave that up to you on you can decide whether or not you feel like you're comfortable with that. I have some friends who are very opposed to Christians doing yoga. I have some friends who are very in favor of Christians doing yoga. So I'm not going to weigh in on that. Okay. Sat Chit Ananda is being, consciousness, and bliss. And this gets used as one word, Sat Chit Ananda. And this is the description of Brahman found at the end of the Upanishads. And this is the only thing that you can say about Brahman that counts as Brahman without attributes. Everything else, if you say Brahman is, that's Brahman with attributes, which is necessarily lower. Satchitananda is the only thing that you can say about Brahman that counts as without attributes. And so this is actually, from a missiological standpoint, there are a lot of people in missiology who use Satchitananda as the Trinity. They use this as an analogy for the Trinity Hindu contexts. So, okay, so the metaphors. So that gives us vocabulary. The metaphors then in the Upanishads help us to try to like orient ourselves to this. Okay, so Arundhati is the Big Dipper. Okay, so you have the Big Dipper, right? And I'm not great at constellations, but here's our Big Dipper, right? Stars which are difficult to see are identified by something that's easier to see. So all knowledge is inference or indirect. So if I wanted you to see, this star out here, right? And I say, well, if you go to the bottom left corner of the Big Dipper, right? You go to this guy, and then you go to the second star in on the ladle, right? And you draw a line. That's how you're going to get there, right? That's what Arundhati is saying. It's saying you use what's known, right? Use the things that people know, and you use that to point in the direction of the things that are harder to understand. Okay, so this is even just at the foundation of using metaphors, right? Arundhati is saying, like, let's start with what makes sense, and let's try to move from there to what's harder to understand. So, rope snake, right? Rope snake, we've probably all thought something was a snake at some point in our life, and it wasn't. It's kind of a common experience. Playing a video game the other day, Assassin's Creed Origins, and there's ropes all over the place in ancient Egypt, and then occasionally that rope is a snake. And so you have this like, is it a rope? Is it a snake? Yeah. And so the metaphor here is we think we see a snake, but it's actually a rope. Thus, our sense perceptions are constantly wrong. So we start with rope snake, as we say, everything's an illusion, which seems counterintuitive for you because you want to believe your sense perception. But actually, there's so many times where your sense perception is wrong that you should accept that what you see is an illusion because you thought it was a snake and it's a rope. Or you thought it was a rope and it was a snake, right? Depending on which way that goes. Clay pot, the air inside of the pot is only different from the air outside the pot because of the pot itself. Okay, so we have clay pot, right? And we put a lid on it, and that lid keeps the pot closed, and whatever's inside here, right, the air inside here, it is only different from the air outside because of the pot itself, right? That pot is creating a barrier for these elements inside the pot from being united to the elements outside the pot. Okay, so the pot is what's in the way. Thus, the distinction between us and the universe is only a matter of artificial division. So division and distinction is Maya. What they're trying to get at here is, see what's inside here. This is your Atman. This is your soul, right? This is you, right? Almost misspelled soul here. So your Atman is in here, and so what we need to do is we need to get rid of the clay pot, right? So that your Atman can be free to be around other things that are just like it. And in reality, they're not other things at all, because Tat Tavan Asi, right? You, which is right in here inside the clay pot, you are that. You are all of this stuff out here. And so the clay pot is doing is creating an artificial distinction between you and what you really are. So we need to get rid of the clay pot and let your Atman experience oneness with Brahman, and that will be moksha, the release from samsara. Okay, that will be the liberation of you and the experience of oneness with everything else. Okay, monkey kitten. Okay, sounds adorable, right? So this is kind of the Calvinist Arminian debate. Baby kitten is picked up by its mother and it hangs limp. A baby monkey has to cling to its mother. So this analogy illustrates the conflict between divine grace and human activity. Are we baby kittens or are we baby monkeys? So within Hinduism, there's different schools of thought on which one of these we are, right? Are we clinging to our mother or are we being held by our mother? The grieved man concerning his son, again, another analogy regarding how we're always wrong, right? If a liar tells a father that his son has died, father grieves for a living son. If the son had actually died and the father wasn't notified, he wouldn't grieve his dead son. Thus, emotions are solely based on our mental state and not on the actual state of affairs, right? If the father can grieve a living son, but he wouldn't grieve a dead son, what's the difference here? The difference is what he's been told. The difference is his sense perception and his understanding of the universe. It's not the actual state of affairs, right? And so that this is another one of those analogies trying to get you to say, like, oh, I don't understand the universe, right? My sense perceptions and the way that I understand the universe, it's flawed. And so this is Maya, right? This is the illusion. And I do need to shed the illusion, right? The painted canvas, painting on a canvas is only visible if the canvas is unrolled. The world is like this painting on canvas. It's unrolled, and then it's rolled back up. All things happen, end, and then they happen again. So even the universe is subject to samsara. And this is actually really strange for us because ultimately there are 4 ages of yuga, or yuga of samsara. This is after the Upanishads. There's Kirta Yuga, there's Tretra Yuga, there's Dvapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. And Kali Yuga is the worst of all of them. And guess where we are? We're right here. So we're in the worst of all of these. But the idea in Hinduism is you get done with Kali Yuga and you start over. And then Kirta Yuga leads to Tretra Yuga. Tretra Yuga leads to Dvapara. Dvapara leads to Kali. And then Kali leads back to Kirta. And so this is just a constant cycle. And so even if your cycle in the midst of this, right, you've got your little cycle here where you are living, dying, and being reborn. Well, let's say you experience moksha, right, and you're out. Well, you're gonna go back in because we're gonna come all the way back down to Kali Yuga again, and you're gonna be, gonna be born, and you're gonna enter your samsara, and then, well, good news, you're going to be released from that samsara again, and then eventually subjected back to it, right? So everything is just cyclical, even the universe itself, not just our individual lives, okay? So that's painted canvas. It's the idea that canvas is unrolled, canvas is rolled back up. Canvas is unrolled, canvas is rolled back up. That's how the universe works. It's unrolled and rolled back up. Right, so that's how the universe works. Dirty mirror. This kind of helps us move more with our understanding of samsara and all of that kind of stuff. If your mirror is dirty, you won't accurately see what's displayed in it. So here, karma is the dirt that distorts the mirror of life, so that we cannot accurately see ourselves. So various yogas, and yoga literally means discipline. So that's what that is. Various disciplines exist as an attempt to remove the dirt of karma. Remember, there's no good karma. There's just bad karma. When the dirt is finally fully removed, you will see that your Atman is actually Brahman, Tattvamasi. Thou art that. Right? If you have a clean mirror and you can accurately see yourself, you will see that you are one with Brahman. But you have dirt on your mirror from karma, and karma is keeping you from seeing reality. And that's what's trapped you in Maya. That's what's trapped you in the illusion. And so it's only when you clean off that karma You clean off that dirt. You can see in the mirror, you are Brahman. You Tattvamasi, right? Hidden treasure, man digging in a field, strikes something of great value, works to remove the debris so he can recover it. Your Atman is like the treasure, and you practice yogas or disciplines to remove the debris, to find that your Atman is Brahman Tattvamasi. Thou art that, right? You are Brahman. Seed in the egg, a tree or a chicken is latent within a seed or an egg. In the same way, the entire universe is latent within Brahman. And then finally, salt and water. Where is Atman? Bring a bowl of water, bring some salt, put the salt in the water. Salt diffuses into the water, and it can't be separated. Now, understand that it can, and that's a whole. We're just talking about metaphor in the Upanishad here, okay? So just accept the metaphor in the Upanishad. In the same way, Atman is diffused into our existence. And so we can't just, like with the clay pot, we can't just smash the pot, right? Because the Atman has become kind of embedded in the pot somewhat. And so we have to clean the pot, right? We have to go through these cycles of life, death, and rebirth to clean the karma off of it, so that the Atman can come out of the pot and the Atman can be one with Brahman. Okay. So that's kind of like the idea, right? Like you're in Maya, the illusion, and at this point there's usually like, well, this doesn't make sense or this doesn't make sense. That's the point. It's not supposed to make sense, right? The whole sound of one hand clapping, and I have students who like try to like flap their hand and make that happen. That's not the point of that, right? The sound of one hand clapping is to take something that requires two hands and force you to think about what it would be like for one hand to do something that one hand can't do. That's the point. And so the idea is thinking about an impossibility to try to break logic, because logic is a part of the illusion. So when you're trying to make sense of something, you're still in the illusion. You need to let go of making sense of things and allow, all of that stuff to just pass away, and then you'll start to experience your oneness with Brahman, right? So some categories in Hinduism. Philosophical Hinduism focuses on how to teach people the insights of the Vedas and the Upanishads, so that they can experience their oneness with Brahman and experience moksha. Moksha is the release, right? There are 6 schools of philosophical Hinduism, and there's popular Hinduism, main expressions, the way of action, the way of devotion. The way of action is adherence to the caste system. We'll talk about that in a second. And the way of devotion is sort of a reaction to Buddhism, which we'll talk about in our next lecture. And the devotion, this is what I mentioned earlier, where it says you just pick one God, and this is, just sort of, I'm going to focus on Vishnu, right? Or I'm going to focus on Krishna or something like that. And this is a radical reinterpretation of the sacred texts, because it's likely a reaction to Buddhism, which, again, we'll talk about Buddhism in the next lecture. Buddhism comes out of Hinduism. Okay, so you have to understand Hinduism before you can understand Buddhism. So that's what we're doing right now, is trying to figure out Hinduism so that we can better understand Buddhism. I mean, we want to understand Hinduism on its own, too, right? It's not just a means to an end. But we do need that foundation in order to understand Buddhism. So the caste system, this is a thing that is just bizarre for us most of the time. Hindu creation narrative shows a god figure being dismembered, and he dismembers himself to produce the universe. Different parts of him become more or less honorable groups of people in the universe. So the Brahmins, and this is Brahman who is doing this, right? So you have, the idea that there's like a body of Brahman, right? And the Brahmins are created from the head. So the Brahmins This is Brahman. Like, I know this is, maybe a little confusing. This is Brahman, but sometimes spelled Brahmin. And the caste that's built out of his head are the highest of the castes. They're priests. They're about 8% of the population in India, but they hold most of the power. Okay. The Kshatriyas, they're the warriors. They're created from the arms. Okay. So they're about 15% of the population of India. Vaishyas, created from the midsection. So that's the Vaishyas. And they're about 9% of the population, the merchants and farmers. And then we have the Shudras. The Shudras are created from the feet. They're about 29% of the population. They're servants. Now, if you're any good at math, you're going to notice that that doesn't add up to 100%. The reason for that is that there are Dalits, also sometimes pronounced Dalit. They're outcasts who disobeyed caste rules and are therefore not considered a part of society. This is nearly half of the population. This is a really big deal, especially missiologically. It's a really big deal. Okay. According to many forms of Hinduism, only a Brahmin male can be liberated from samsara. All others must follow the caste system until they are reborn as a Brahmin male. So you just have to keep working your way up the chain until you get to Brahmin, and then within Brahmin, if you're a female, then you have to be reincarnated at least one more time and hopefully be a male, and that's the only time that you can actually experience moksha. Okay, that's the only time that you can actually get out of samsara. Okay. These Dalits, what happens with these Dalits is, notice here, the Shudras are servants, merchants and farmers, they're Vaishyas, warriors are Kshatriyas, priests are Brahmins. Well, what happens if there's a servant who wants to be a merchant? Well, that person is outcast. Because they're acting literally like outcast means they are acting outside of the caste system. They're acting outside of their duty, and so they are removed from the caste system. They are cast out, right? They are outcasts. So this is the caste system in Hinduism. Okay, this is a big deal. And so an example of this is if you read the Mahabharata, Krishna, and you can always tell in Hindu artwork if you see a person who has blue skin, they're a god. Now, the artwork isn't necessarily trying to say that that person actually has blue skin in the situation. They're just depicting them that way to try to signal that to the people who are viewing the artwork. Also, you can see up here, this is Hanuman, the monkey god. And this, you've probably seen this symbol before. It looks kind of like a 3 with an S behind it or something. This is the Sanskrit symbol for Om. So that's what that symbol means. Okay. So Krishna, in the god of Arjuna's charioteer, and this is Arjuna, counsels the warrior on the verge of battle against his kinsman. Okay. So you can see here he's got arrows, and he's in a chariot, and you see over here there's all these people and elephants and stuff like that. And you see Krishna is pointing at them. Arjuna is having this like inner struggle of, I don't want to fight my family, but he's a warrior. And so what do you think Krishna is going to tell him? Well, if he's a warrior, he has to do his casterly duty and be a warrior. And if he doesn't, he's going to be outcast. Right? So you have to do what you are supposed to do in your role. Okay? That's like the chief idea here. Okay? Teachings of Hinduism, individual in the quest for liberation. We talked about these already. Your Atman is your soul. Karma is your negative actions that have kind of attached themselves to your soul. Dharma, we haven't talked about this before. This is teaching. Okay. and this is going to be more important when we get to Buddhism. So Dharma just means teaching, and then samsara is this this wheel, the wheel of samsara. It's the life, death, rebirth cycle, and then moksha is the release from that. Okay, and so these are the chief ideas in Hinduism. You are an Atman, and your Atman tattvamasi. Your Atman, it is that. It is that. Right? It is that. Right? It's all of these things. Right? Everything is one. And that's that monistic idea that all things are just the same thing. Right? Three paths to liberation. There's karma marga, is activities. So what you're doing. Right? Bhakti marga is devotion. That's the one that's to a particular god. And then Jnana marga is the more philosophical approach. Vedanta Hinduism, the predominant school of Hindu philosophy, there's Advaita Vedanta, Vishishta, and then Dvaita. These are all various schools of Hindu philosophy. And there's actually a great class on YouTube by a Hindu philosopher on Hindu philosophy. If you really want to get into the weeds on this, you can do that. There's a lot of stuff there on that. It's really interesting, just very different from Western philosophy. Okay. Individual and society, think through that caste system thing of working your way up from one level to the next. There's sort of 4 stages of life. These are kind of the stages within those individual points that you're going to move up. And even within the caste system, there are like micro castes inside of the caste systems that you kind of have to move up. And so it's, people tend to know, like, they know your last name, they know where you're at, right? And so this is one of the reasons why arranged marriages are such a big deal in that part of the world, because you don't marry outside of your caste, right? So all this stuff is strictly kind of controlled. So 4 stages of life. You start as a student, then you can kind of move up to be a householder. Then you can be a forest-dwelling hermit if you kind of renounce things and move out into the forest to try to pursue. And then, ultimately, you can be a renouncer where you renounce everything. And this is probably what this guy's doing. He's probably a sannyasi. He's probably a renouncer. And this is sort of like that final stage where you're like, I'm right there. I just want to break through to enlightenment. I just want to break through to moksha, to the release from samsara. I'm trying to get there, right? So this is an example. This is a sannyasi, right? This guy is a sannyasi. And his sectarian affiliation was indicated by his forehead markings. This marking shows that he's worshiper of Vishnu. So he's specifically subset to Vishnu. You can see on his clothing, he's got the Om, right? He's got the Om in here. I don't read Sanskrit, so I'm not sure what the rest of his garment says. But you see, there's lots of instances of the Om, right? And so he's got a bucket. This is like for begging, for asking for help, and that's something that you don't necessarily help a poor person because they deserve to be there because of karma, but a sannyasi you would help because they're working their way towards enlightenment, right? One thing you probably are well aware of in the West, we have the namaste thing. This is Hindu. Namaste is a simple way of giving a respectful greeting, as well as saying I bow to the divine in you, sort of the tattvamasi, right? Thou art that. We're the same. We're I am you, you are me, right? We're all one, that sort of thing. Talked a little bit about the Om symbol already. Also, the swastika, right? Om is the sacred symbol in Hinduism. Can be traced back to the Vedas. It's the primordial sound through which the universe manifested. It's considered sacred by Hindus, Jains, Buddhists, and Sikhs. I need to take out that page reference because it's not in a book that you guys are reading. This is from Oxford University Press book on world religions. So that's where those are coming from. The word swastika or svastika is derived from Sanskrit for good. It is. and it's fortunate or auspicious. So the swastika itself is an ancient solar symbol that denotes harmony, balance, and good fortune. It's venerated by Hindus as well as Buddhists and Jains. I actually lived in an apartment in California that had a little like bronze swastika on the door. It was mounted on the door, and it's because the people who lived in the apartment before us were Hindu, right? But obviously that symbol has taken on a completely different meaning, as we mentioned before, with Hitler and the Nazis. So just super strange that you would pick a Hindu symbol for fortunate. Anyway, so ultimate reality, we talked about this a bit already. Monistic Hindus believe that Brahman is the supreme unitary reality, the ground of all being, understood as undifferentiated and without attributes. Brahman manifests itself in the world in all its particular forms. And Brahman isn't necessarily thought of as like a personal entity, right? Brahman is just sort of like this being of some sort, right? For dualistic or devotional Hindus, ultimate reality is typically understood to be fully embodied in a deity. So we have Vishnu or Shiva or whoever you choose to be the deity that you're gonna honor. How should we live in this world as Hinduism? Powerfully attracted to the samsaric realm of particulars, human beings are caught up in the continual cycle of death and rebirth, right? Life, death, and rebirth. Hinduism prescribes living in a manner that moves the self towards liberation from samsara. So there's the three paths: the action, knowledge, and devotion that we talked about. All the while, Hindus are required to live in conformity with Dharma, teaching, upholding the cosmic and social order. And what's our ultimate purpose? Moksha is liberation from samsara, almost impossible to describe fully with, from the perspective of this world. The experience of moksha is said to be one of infinite awareness and eternal bliss. And again, there's all sorts of like logical, like, well, but what about, well, but what about, but what about, but all of those are going to be Maya, right? And so you're not going to get to a point where moksha makes sense, because if it made sense, it would be a part of Maya. It's inherently not going to make sense, right? For monistic Hindus, moksha involves the full realization of the identity of the self with Brahman, rather than with this world. And for dualistic or devotional Hindus, moksha is complete realization of the soul's perpetual and deep, loving relationship with God. Okay, so some of the deities, we'll go through those, and then that'll be all for today. Brahma, not Brahmin, is the creator god, represented with four faces, which relate to the four Vedas. Not active in the world since he finished his creation. Here's a depiction of Brahman, or Brahma. And he's not blue in this picture, because gods aren't always blue. But if you have somebody who's blue, it's always a deity. Vishnu is the preserver, signified by a mace and the Om. And so you can see here you have the mace, and appears in 10 avatars, most popular of which is the 8th avatar, Krishna. And avatars are just sort of incarnations. So Vishnu is a deity, and the avatars are individual appearances of that deity. So Krishna is the most popular. Krishna is born around 3200. 3200 is way back there. Most complete incarnation of Vishnu. He's the one disguised in that image earlier as the Arjuna's chariot driver. Tells him his highest dharma is fulfilling his obligations, because karma has put you in that position for a reason. So you have to do what your duty is. Okay. Rama. Rama is usually indicated by a bow. So we have his bow here. And so there's that. Also, the presence of Hanuman. And so Hanuman is a big fan of Rama. Hanuman's the monkey god. And so he will usually show up with him. And then Hanuman shows up, and he's let me erase my marks here. He shows up, and he's always going to be with the monkey face, and he often will open up his chest to show Rama and Sita in his heart, and so indicating how devoted he is to Rama and Sita. And then finally, Lakshmi. Lakshmi is the goddess of good fortune. So Lakshmi, you're going to see her with elephants. You can see here the swastika on the elephants, right? Same with one over here. She also is going to show up with lotus usually, and that's Lakshmi. Notice the blue skin there. So that's her. Now, having said all of that, for most Hindus, all of the gods are ultimately Brahma. So everything is ultimately one thing, even the gods, right? So this is why like Hinduism can be atheistic, monotheistic, polytheistic, henotheistic, right? Like Hinduism is so incredibly diverse, and so we have to be careful trying to like limit it to specific things, because it is wild. It's wild. Again, like I said, the book Our Religion, chapter on Hinduism, and there is really great at trying to kind of like lay some of this stuff out. But that'll be enough for us for right now for Hinduism. That's going to lay the ground for us to go into Buddhism in the next lecture, and so I'll see you there.